So hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Virtual Vanderbilt Summer Science Academy. And it's Monday, and it is the last week of our virtual series. I'm just shocked. I just cannot believe it because I feel like we just got started. And for the virtual series, this is the last week. And then next week, for those of you who are in person, that's our last week. What a crazy time. Um, you will all be getting an email from me at the end of this week to take a survey. And what we'd like to do is really see how this program has impacted you. Last year, we did a very similar program, and we actually wrote everything up and have a manuscript in preparation. It has been sitting in review for months. How frustrating. That's just normal for educational science too. So anyway, as you guys know, today I am here to talk to you about applying to graduate schools. So especially my focus is applying to biomedical PhD programs and how to stand out and what we're looking for. Um, and I want this to be a dialogue. If you have any questions, I'm going to pull up the chat. I'm happy to help. The last thing I want to do is get to the end and have you forget what your questions are. So feel free to chime in. I'm totally here and pretty casual, whatever you need. So you guys heard a bunch of students' stories, not just students, people along this path. You've heard their stories from multiple points throughout the journey. And hopefully what that did is it gave you a really tangible idea of what this path looks like. And hopefully our big goal is that hopefully it helped you determine if this is a good path for you, if this fits what you would want and what you're looking for your future endeavors. And hopefully you're here today because you've realized that, yeah, it is. So how do you get to the next step? What does that look like? All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to leave up your pictures here. So if you raise your hand, I'll be able to see it. Or if you have any questions, I'm going to pull up the chat right now. Whatever works best for you, feel free to chime in with anything. This session in particular can have a lot of questions, in part because maybe you've heard some things from advisors at your school or other faculty at your school that might seem a little contrary to what I'm going to be saying today. And if that's true, let me know and make sure clarify with me rather than assume that everything they said is right or everything I said is right. Feel free to clarify with me throughout. All right, so I'm going to talk about applying to biomedical PhD programs. So I'm going to circle back to why you would want to pursue a PhD a little bit. We did this before, but now that you've heard some people's journeys throughout, hopefully you can see the different reasons why someone would pursue a PhD. Then I'm going to jump in and tell you what it looks like to apply to these programs and how to stand out. I have some resources which I've given before, but I think they have a little bit different connotation this time. And I didn't get to talk too much about Vandy last time, so I might do that here because I just want to make sure you have a good sense of what Vanderbilt looks like. Not because I think Vanderbilt's, the perfect fit for everybody, but if we're here, why not give you a chance to see a little bit more about what our programs look like? All right. So why a PhD? So if you were listening to our series, you probably heard lots of different reasons for why people were considering a PhD. So do you like asking questions? Some of the people presenting said that they've been really curious about the world since they were a little kid. Do you like discovering something new? Some people really were very passionate about being the first one to know something in a field. Do you like solving problems? That's a very, very common theme that comes with doing research. And if you're doing research this summer or have done research at home, then you realize that so much of doing science is problem solving, not just experimental design, but troubleshooting and working your way to the right answer. Do you want to be a better communicator? That is a huge part about being in science, is being able to talk about the things that you're doing, to be able to talk with other scientists. And do you want to gain skills to aid in a career in science? We didn't talk too much about the diversity of careers that someone could pursue with a PhD, in part because that is such a huge topic that we would need a whole lecture to talk about that. We did have one representative who's in the academic world for their career, and one person who's more in an industry setting. And that's kind of a little bit of a cliche to say academia or industry. It's not quite that black and white. There are plenty of other opportunities. But if you know you want a career in science, regardless of how you want to apply it, whether that's being in academia or going to some other route, getting a PhD can really help give you those skills. And then, of course, there are so many good reasons to pursue a PhD. And hopefully you heard that throughout these conversations, that some people were considering medical school until they did research and they realized they really love research. Some people just really knew that they wanted to do research and they loved that all along. Some people wanted to pursue a PhD because they just enjoyed doing science. So lots of good reasons. One thing that hopefully you did not hear much of is that people are not pursuing this path for a title, for money, because of pressure, or because of a med school alternative. So let me clarify what I mean by that. I don't want pursuing a PhD to be a backup to medical school. If you know you want patient care and you want to interact with patients, you probably found out through this series that that just doesn't happen with a PhD. A PhD is about doing research and about understanding more about science. You might be using clinically relevant data, but you're not going to be able to actually treat patients. So don't do, these are two different paths. Also, don't pursue this because somebody else is telling you that you need to get a higher degree, whether that's family or other faculty members or even yourself. If you just want the degree, this is going to be a really hard journey. So, what you heard through this series are a lot of people who are passionate about science. And if that's you and you like learning and you like problem solving and you're a tinkerer, then a PhD is a great path for you. Okay, and one thing you probably saw a lot of through the series is that people who were pursuing this path really combined these three things: their skills, what they're good at. They had a talent for doing science and both at the academic setting and at the bench. They had values that matched this up. There were qualities about doing research that were relevant and important to them and their lifestyle. And they were interested in doing this too. So that's what's made this path satisfying to them. So hopefully throughout the series, you've gotten a little bit of a taste of, whether you stayed for just the PhD talks on Mondays or if you dabbled a little bit throughout the week. Hopefully you're able to better identify where your interests, values, and skills overlap. And hopefully actually doing science helps clarify that to you. All right. So let me just remind you, what is graduate school? And I've already said this before, but graduate school is much more about being at the bench than it is about being in the class. And I'm reminding you of that because that's very relevant for our application process and admissions process and what admissions committees look for in candidates. Okay, research is a huge component of graduate school. So let's jump into applying now. Okay, so there are lots of questions that you're probably asking yourself. And I'm going to talk through all of these. When and where should you apply? We'll talk a little bit about if you should take a gap year or not. We'll talk about how to apply to graduate programs, so what the application process looks like. We'll talk about the interview process. What should I expect and plan for the interview process? We'll go into that as well. Hopefully the application process goes well and you get some interviews in the path. So if you do, you want to be prepared for those interviews as well. And then, of course, what should you consider in making your final decision? We're going to walk through all of these things. Okay, when should you apply? This is a big question. I think a lot of people who are considering graduate school um, might, if you're a senior or a junior or somewhere in undergrad, you might automatically think, well, I'm going to apply right after undergrad. Why not continue this momentum in school and go ahead and start the PhD? That might be a really, really great idea. But more and more, I see people taking gap years. And to be honest, I really hate that word, gap years, because it's not a gap, right? You're continuing your education and in a slightly different way. So you're getting exposure to doing research full time, which, as I said before, that's what graduate school is. So much of it is more focused on doing research. So the things you need to think about if you want to take a gap year are these. Are you prepared? And by prepared, what I mean is, of course, academically, do you have the academic background, which hopefully you should, because you're probably not going to take a lot of classes in your gap time. And we'll talk about options for gap time. But more importantly, have you done enough research to really know what you should be considering in graduate school? And by that, what I mean is the training you get before you start grad school help you make the important decisions when you're in grad school. And what do I mean by important decisions? I mean, of course, where you'll go to grad school. It'll help you really evaluate which programs are the best fit for you. But even more important than that, it'll help you evaluate what kind of mentoring style fits you best and what you're looking for in a PI or in a lab environment when you're preparing to do your thesis work. And that is so important because the lab you're in is probably the most important thing in graduate school. The specific lab you pick is the most important decision you'll make in your graduate career training. So no pressure. But I've seen a lot of people who take gap years, and that really helps them realize who they are as a person. And you might think, oh, I know myself really well. I did. I thought I knew myself really well. But being kind of uh, working in lab full time can be very enlightening. So, are you prepared in the sense of do you know yourself and do you know what you're looking for? Do you have the experience you need? A lot of the top tier graduate programs are looking for pretty extensive experience. By that I mean, it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years of experience that they're looking for. And it might be difficult to get that kind of experience while you're an undergrad, especially during COVID, you guys. That is really, really frustrating and very, very difficult. And the challenge is that, you know, yes, the pandemic has really impacted the type of experience that a lot of people can get. However, that doesn't change what really makes you the most prepared for graduate school. So we're not looking for a lot of experience just so that we can say, oh, our incoming students have 3 years of experience and not 2 years of experience. It's not about that. It's that we want to make sure that you've had a depth of experience for two things: to make sure you know what science is and that you've been able to get to the depth of doing research, that you're contributing to the research, you're contributing your ideas, and you're developing the directions of the projects. But so to make sure that you actually like it. But also, we have just found that people with more experience come better prepared. So this kind of preparation and experience really go hand in hand. We also want to make sure that you're committed to this degree. Gosh, there are so many people who just aren't certain what they want to do when they're graduating, when they're a senior. They haven't quite figured out, do they want to go to med school? Do they want to go to grad school? Do they want to go to pharmacy school? Do they want to even go to school anymore after their undergrad? Gosh, that's a big question. So rather than jumping into something that you're not fully certain about, taking a gap year can be very, very helpful for kind of finalizing your decision. And 1 or 2 years in your life that might feel like a long time to take a gap year and to delay that education. Let me tell you, it's really not when it's about making the right decision for you and for your career. Okay, I've seen a lot of people who taking that gap time is exactly what they needed in order to have the right motivation for whatever their path is to pursue. So I don't want you to think, the whole point I'm trying to make is that you should not think that gap time is bad. And I just often hear people who get the wrong advice from their undergraduate mentors or, other people around them who say it'll look bad if you take time between graduating and applying. That is not true at all. Gap time only looks good on applications, regardless of whether that's graduate school or medical school or something else. Gap time is only positive as long as you're getting more experience, right? Gap year where you're traveling the world might not be that, I mean, gosh, that'd be fun. That might not be that attractive in applying to the next step. So gap years are not bad. Now, if you're ready after undergrad, wonderful. That's fantastic. You could definitely apply your senior year. What we're seeing is that it's about 50-50. About half of the people who are successful in matriculating to our grad programs come straight from undergrad, and about 50% take a gap year. Okay, so what experience might be best? And I got a great question about that, so I'm going to address that right now. What experience is best? So I'm talking about gap years. Oh, good thing, take a gap year. Well, maybe. So what should you do in this gap time? So you could pursue a master's degree. You could work as a research assistant where you're not going to get a degree, but you're working full-time in a lab. Or you could do something called a post-baccalaureate program. So let me quickly explain what each of those are and the merits of each of them and what you should do. Let me quickly say there's not one right answer for everybody. It's more about what's right for you. So a master's degree, of course, is more school, usually takes about 2 years. And the right master's, if you're pursuing a PhD after the master's, the right kind of master's is one where, yes, you'll be taking some coursework, but you need one that has a focus on research. What you don't want is a master's program that's just mostly classes. That's not going to help you. That's not the type of experience that we need. We don't want people who are just wanting to take classwork. Now, if you need that classwork, you can still get some good experience, some good classes in a thesis-based master's program, but you also are spending time doing research. Also, a thesis-based master's program might be a little bit less expensive because you might get paid or you might get some tuition remission by working in somebody's lab. Okay, so the right master's for a PhD program is one where you're also pursuing research significantly, especially in your second year. Now, let me quickly say, master's is not required for a PhD. So don't do a master's, not don't do a master's unless you need to do a master's. And what do I mean by need to do a master's? I only recommend people consider a master's degree if they really need to overcome a, an undergraduate GPA that may not reflect your true potential. And by that, I mean, if you have a lower GPA and you had some stuff really come up and that's not really what you can do, not really representative of your academic potential, then a master's program might be a great way to say, hey, I actually am good in the class, and I'm going to get a master's degree to really show it to you. So by that, I don't want to give any score cutoffs or anything because everybody reviews applications holistically. But if you don't have a somewhat solid GPA, then you might want to consider a master's. If you're not sure if your GPA is pretty solid or solid enough, you can email me and I'd be happy to give you some feedback on that. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Being a research assistant is totally different because you're just working in a lab. This is just a job, about 40 hours a week. Maybe you'll work a little bit more than that. It just kind of depends on you and your relationship with your boss, but it's a job. It's a normal job. However, what I want you to do if you're going to work as a research assistant is I want you to make sure you have a project that you're working on. Don't work as a research assistant just to be a lab manager and make buffers and order reagents. That's not the type of experience you need. You need an experience where you're pushing a project forward and where you're, claiming something as yours. Granted, you could be both. You could be a lab manager where, 50% of your time you are helping the lab, but 50% of your time you're doing a project. That's fine. Totally, totally fine. But you don't want to just be a set of hands. Now, that's true in both an academic setting and an industry. It's totally okay to work in an industry lab as long as you're not just processing samples. And that's the big thing that sometimes can come across in a negative way. When we see people who have taken a gap year or two and they're working in a company, then, our first question is, are they working on hypothesis-driven research? And if the answer is no, if they're just processing some, other lab samples, that's not what we need. That's not the type of project-based work that will be attractive for grad school. So, just don't take a job like that. If I'm being straightforward. Um, I see a great question. Is being a volunteer in research, could that be similar to working as an RA? Absolutely. I don't care how much you get paid. If you're working in a lab, that's what really matters, and you're working on an independent project. Now, with that said, if you've graduated, find a job, get paid. In fact, that's why I tell most people not to pursue a master's, because it's just more money, and it can sometimes not be well spent money. Work, get paid, that's a really positive thing. If you need to volunteer for some reason, that's totally understandable, and that's like kudos to you. That's a big deal, but try not to. Not because it looks bad, but just for your own sake. um, oh, great questions. Okay, let me say one more thing. If you're also working as a research assistant, where you work academically kind of matters. You want to work as a research assistant in a research intensive institution. So working as a research assistant at more of an undergraduate based institution may not be as attractive as working at a place that's like a top tier research institution. So look for a paid job at some place like Vanderbilt or someplace of that caliber, because it's not that the name matters as much as the type of training you get. You want to get training in a place that looks like where you want to go to graduate school, to show that you know what research at a research intensive place looks like. It's not that we're trying to get everybody from Stanford or everybody from Harvard to come to Vanderbilt. It's not about the name for prestige sake. It's about the name or the type of institution, to make sure it matches the kind of setting that we have here. Okay, publications, is that required? That's a great question. I want to say it kind of depends. So the short answer is no. We don't expect people who apply to have publications. Now, if you work as a research assistant and you've been there for a little while, like a couple of years, um, then and you don't have a publication, then there might be some question marks. Now, I'm not talking about a first author publication, middle author publication, or a publication submitted or in preparation. That's fine. It doesn't have to be accepted. Now, with that said, that's only if you've been in a lab for a healthy amount of time. If you don't have a publication that's in process, then it starts to, the committee starts to wonder how you've been productive. And a lot of that evidence comes from your letter writers. So if they say there's a publication in preparation, and if you say it in your personal statement or something like that, that's really, really helpful. Okay, some questions here. Can you apply as a research assistant without much independent research experience yourself? If you don't have much experience, can you apply to be a research assistant? Absolutely. This is super duper common for labs to be looking for somebody who want this exact thing, a year or two of gap experience. They're going to spend some time to train you in the lab. But this is pretty common for, like, maybe not the lab manager, but someone in the lab being a set of hands to help prepare some reagents, but also to work on a project themselves. Absolutely. I think it's helpful. Quick note, if you're applying to those kinds of jobs, it can be helpful to state that you're interested in pursuing a PhD in the long run. So make sure that's clear. Okay, some more questions. This is wonderful. How do you evaluate the research experience of international students doing research in other countries? That is a great question. Um, so let me quickly say that, kind of similar to what I was talking about with the caliber of institution in terms of the a research intensive focus of an institution, that holds true whether you're in the US or if you're somewhere else. We're looking for strong research experience at strong research institutions, whether that's here or somewhere else. So please keep that in mind, especially if you're an international candidate. Getting research experience at a place in the US can be very attractive and very helpful, but it's not always necessary. That kind of depends on institutions you're applying to. So there are some schools that are recruiting a lot of international students regardless of where they did their work. Some are a little more focused on international people who have been here in the US. So I would ask the schools you're interested in what kind of experience they're looking for. Okay, so here's a question. So I mentioned publications. Would a thesis work? So, like, if you're saying either in an undergrad or a master's program and you have a thesis that's required, that's a very attractive thing. So um, it's not quite the same as a publication in the sense of it really shows your productivity in the lab and is positive to the committee, but it doesn't count as a publication per se, because generally it's not peer reviewed outside of your institution. So it's not quite the same, although don't think it's a negative thing. It's a wonderful thing. So there you go. Postbac program. Boy, we're working through this. We're working through this slide. A postbac program. So postbac master's is a degree seeking program where you do research and you do take classes, and RA is a time where you're doing just research. Postbac programs are kind of a mix between those two. Post-baccalaureate is what that means. Baccalaureate is your undergraduate degree. So after your undergrad degree, these are generally 1 or 2 year long programs where you don't get a degree, but it's a program where you have the chance to potentially take some classes, but more of the focus is on doing research. So it's a hybrid essentially, but you don't get a master's at the end of it. Um, there are some great post-bac programs. A lot of these are NIH funded. So there are NIH prep programs, which those are NIH funded programs for institutions across the country. Those are geared towards giving underrepresented students an opportunity to do more research. The NIH in DC has its own post-bac program for anybody who's wanting some more research experience. So you could also do a postbac program at the NIH in DC. And to be honest, that's one of the most attractive things that you could do. If you are okay moving to DC, which is a great place to be. But if that's something that you'd be open to and you need some gap time, I'd consider, looking at that as an option. There are other schools that have programs that they call post-bac programs that might be some similar to these. But generally what it is it's a non-degree program where you could take a little bit of classwork. Now, this is like one class a semester sort of thing, so not to the same extent as a master's. All right, great. Timeline for PhD application. So most applications open in August or September. Ooh, really quick question. Do you have to pay tuition for a postbac? The answer is no. So if it's a tuition-based postbac program, they're just misnaming themselves in my mind. So to me, a postbac program is one where you don't pay and you get a stipend. You get paid to do research and they cover the tuition for you too. Great questions. So it's a really good option, right? Yeah, consider it. Timeline for PhD applications, most open in August or September, and they're due about December 1st. So we'll talk a little bit more about what this looks like. So this was a long slide, but oh my gosh, it's 12:30. So gap time is okay. If you need it, be thoughtful about what you do. Don't spend money on a master's unless you need to. Okay. So what the timeline looks like is you submit your application the fall before you want to enter. So generally before around December 1st is the major deadline across the country. Now, unlike med school applications, you don't necessarily need to get your application in as soon as the application opens. So you might have heard for med schools, get it in early, be the first one there. That's not true for grad school applications. Get it in before it's due, maybe about a month before it's due, just to be safe. But most people don't apply. We have like an exponential curve of when people apply to our program. It's little to none until you hit like November. So that's the major time when people are getting them in November, December. December is usually the deadline. Interviews usually are January through March of that year. So you can hear about an interview sometime between December and January is usually when most interviews are sent out, not just at Vanderbilt, but across the country. There's a centralized deadline for when applications or for when you have to choose where you want to go to grad school. And that's April 15th, and that's for grad programs across the country. You have to commit to a program by April 15th. Some schools might give waitlist offers after this, but we really, in the biomed world, we really try not to have that happen. You're going to be settled and programs will be settled by April 15th, if not earlier. And then programs start in August. Very few PhD programs have a spring admissions. They're pretty uniformly fall admissions. Okay, great question. If someone said if they're not sure about going straight into grad school or taking a gap year, excellent question. Should they go ahead and apply in the fall? I have a few thoughts on that. The first is it can be expensive to apply to grad programs. A lot of schools have a fee that's like about $100, $75 to $100, something like that. Some of them will give either need-based or research-based fee waivers. So here at Vanderbilt, we give a fee waiver to anybody who's done research in any US institution, whether that's undergrad or research institution during the summer or something else. So we want to give everybody a fee waiver. So the other thing about applying in the fall, if you think you might be more competitive after a gap year or two, applying earlier could be great because you could get some good feedback in applying the next cycle. But if you know what you really need is some more research, I've seen some people who apply and then get into programs and they're tempted to go to some lower tier programs just to get started. And I don't want anybody to do that. If you just need a year or two of research experience to get into a top tier institution, just go ahead and take that research experience. And that way you won't be tempted to go to some place that may not be as high of a caliber as you deserve. Um, so super mixed feelings about that. I think that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but those are my honest thoughts. And of course, anybody could email me and I love to give help. So if you have specific questions about your situation, let me know. Okay, where should you apply? Big question here. This should be based on a few things. The research opportunities available. So some of you might have very specific research interests and you know exactly what you want to study and you know exactly, the applications of your work. Some of you might have really, really broad interests. If you're somewhere that has more specific interests, then you should really dive in and look at the research at research institutions to see if it matches what you want to do. That's a lot of work to look into each specific program. If you've got really broad interests, you're probably fine. Like when I applied, I just liked cell and molecular biology. That's super duper broad. So I probably didn't need to dive into specific research going on at each institution because I would probably find a million different labs that would be interesting to me. But if you know that you want to study uh, P53 in cancer, you should make sure that the institution has at least a few faculty studying P53 at that institution. That's pretty specific, but that's important if you have specific interests. The program offered should kind of be important to you. And by that, what I mean is more on the research side of things. Does it have rotations? What faculty are available to you? Is it an umbrella program or is it more a departmental program? The actual classwork, in my honest opinion, should not make or break whether you apply to a program or not, just because that's not nearly as important as the research. Of course, the location can matter to you. If you are someone who can move anywhere in the country, fantastic, great, you can apply broadly. If you feel bound to a specific geographic location, that is totally okay. We are so lucky to have so many great research institutions that you're gonna find lots of institutions. I'm from Nashville, so I drew an 8-hour radius around Nashville, and that's where my grad school search was. And I don't feel bad about that at all. 8 hours because that's what I thought I could drive in a day. Okay. How many places should you, the point I want to make about the location is you want to be happy living there as well as having great research. And it's okay to care about your life. And it's okay to care about, is it a city or is it not in a city? And what do I want personally? Do I want a smaller city or a bigger city? Or is it in the Northeast where it might be a little bit cold, but I like that? Or is it in the South where it's might be a little bit warm and I like that? It's okay to care about where you live. Okay, how many places should you apply to? This is a big question. There's not a good answer here. I would say that you could apply to as few as 4 or 5 or as many as 12. And the reason I'm okay with that big of a spread is, and the reason I'm telling you that is this is all kind of personal preference. I've seen some people say that they applied to 15 places, and that just seems a little bit like a lot to me, and like they maybe didn't do the research to narrow down what fits them. Don't do that. This also isn't med school, where you kind of have to apply to a million places just to get into one. Um, I think it's okay if you only apply to a few. It's okay if you apply to more than that. What I don't want you to do is just apply to one school. Even if you know you love that school, and even if you know you've got a good chance of getting in there, don't apply to just one. And the reason for that is this is a great opportunity to get to know the research community broadly. Even if you see yourself, I'm going to just use Vanderbilt as an example, even if you see yourself at Vanderbilt and you think you could get in, I tell everybody to apply to a few places just so that they can confirm. You might have only experienced one place, okay? Confirm that that's the right fit for you. And if it is, that's great. But then when you hit, road bumps along the way in grad school, you can say, I looked other places and I knew that was where I was supposed to go. That is a huge mental game that you should play with yourself is confirm the place is right for you. Because it can be hard. Grad school is hard no matter where you go. Okay. And so making sure it's the right fit for you is huge. I don't recommend applying to a whole bunch of them because it takes a while to interview. I think a lot of schools are going to do virtual interviews, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's a little bit easier than traveling to all the schools. But I've talked to a lot of people who have done a lot of interviews, and the max that I've seen people do is like 6 or 7 interviews. Once you get up to 8, it's exhausting. You do not want to do more than 6 or 7. It's okay to do 2 or 3, but just don't over apply. Let me quickly say, if you get a whole bunch of interview offers and there are some schools that you can start crossing off your list, and they're more your safety schools, it's okay to cancel an interview. Don't feel bad canceling an interview. You're saving them time, you're saving yourself time. Totally okay. Most schools don't require the GRE anymore. I recommend to like 99% of people not to even take the GRE. And the reason for that is the only time for the schools that have it as optional, the only time that's helpful is if you really do a great job, like really great job, and if it might might overcome a less ideal GPA. Okay. So you don't need it if you've already got a great GPA. And if you've got a less than ideal GPA, for the most part, you're going to be competitive at some schools, and you'd have to just kill it on the GRE for that to be part of the conversation. A mediocre GRE, or even a little bit above an average GPA or GRE, is not going to be that impactful. Okay, so just don't waste your time. That's my opinion. As one of the schools who published the paper, the seminal paper that made all the other schools get rid of the GRE, that's my stance. Okay, application fees. They're really annoying. It's okay to write to them and ask for fee waivers. A lot of them will give them to you. So don't be shy. Ask for them. Okay, boy, how to apply to grad programs. A lot of schools want you to be, of course, ambitious, bright, curious, dedicated to discovery, and experienced. That all really comes through in your letters of recommendation. Okay, so of course, in your personal statement, you'll talk about the research you've done, but your letters of recommendation are the most important part of your application. Okay. And by that, what I mean is your letters should come from faculty who know your research experience. Okay. At least one, probably 2 should come from people who have seen you do research. It's okay if you have a third one that's from more of an academic advisor, that's fine, but it's really attractive to have a couple letters from research mentors. By research mentors, I mean the PI of the lab. Getting a letter from a postdoc in the lab or from a grad student in the lab is not nearly as attractive as getting a letter from the PI in the lab. Even if you work more closely with the postdoc and the grad student, you really want the PI to be the one sending in the letter. They will almost certainly ask your postdoc or grad student mentor to either draft up the letter first or to contribute to their draft of the letter. But we sometimes, especially if we see letters from graduate students, um, I've actually heard comments from the committee that it seems a little bit naive. So definitely don't get a letter from a grad student. Okay, if you've worked in one lab your entire undergraduate degree, that's fantastic. Would you recommend finding other research mentors? Fantastic question. That's a good benefit to, if you've been in one lab for a long period of time, that's a great thing. What I would recommend is, of course, have them write your letter. And if there's another lab that you or your lab has worked closely with, or if you've done like journal clubs with another group, or if you've interacted with a collaborator in some way, that would be real. Or if there's just someone who's on, like, if you have a thesis, if you're writing a thesis, or like one of your thesis committee members, or if there's just someone who's seen you present too, someone who's also seen you in some capacity in the lab would be really fantastic. So if that isn't relevant to you and you really have mostly worked with your PI, but you've been there that long, that's totally understandable. So one letter from that one person is completely okay, because if you've been there your whole undergrad degree, that makes total sense. Does it matter if the letter comes from a research experience earlier in your college career, like after your sophomore year? Totally fine. Yes, I think it's definitely okay to get letters kind of regardless of when they happen in your undergrad degree. Um, they'll probably speak to how you were given your stage of training. So for example, if you were an early stage undergrad and you were just getting started learning how to pipette, they'll probably say that, but then they'll say they did a great job considering their stage of training. So that's completely okay. I've seen some advice that's you should get a letter from everybody you've done research with. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think if you have a couple letters from research mentors and say there's a third, say you've done 3 research experiences and that third one just you didn't have a great relationship with, that's okay. As long as you have at least a couple, that should be fine. Okay, so letters of recommendation are a huge part of the application, probably the most important part. Of course, transcripts, almost every school is fine with unofficial transcripts. Don't pay to send in your official transcripts yet. You'll need to do it when you matriculate into a program. When you actually join a program, then you'll have to send in official transcripts, but don't pay for it until you get into a program. Most schools aren't requiring GREs or standardized tests, so I should put a big strike through that. And a personal statement. Some schools have personal statements that as the one essay requirement, that's a personal statement. Some schools have 2 essays that one is more of a personal statement, one is more of a research statement. Um, Regardless, even if the program you're applying to doesn't have a research statement, you need to incorporate research as the major component of your essay. So by that, I mean, talk about the experiences you've had, talk about what you got from them, how it changed your attitude towards doing research, what you learned about it, how you contributed to the science, what specific parts of a project you did. That's what you should be talking about. Don't just list, I did this with that person and this with that person. Really dive into how it impacted how you think and how you think impacted the work you did. Another quick thing I'll say about personal statements, I'm talking a lot, I'm realizing. Don't feel like you have to wow us with your intro sentence. I think sometimes there's that tendency to really stand out with your introduction. That's okay if you don't. Just be genuine. If you want to talk about how you got interested in research, if it's just that you found an interesting lab when you were an undergrad and that was really attractive to you, that's fine. You don't have to have a sob story. However, if there is something personal to you that impacts your interest, you can write about that. That's totally fine. But don't feel like you have to come up with something emotional if there isn't that part to your motivation. So if your essay structure looks very similar to your neighbor's essay structure with a few details different, that's completely fine. You're going to wow us with the research you've done, not with how fancy your essay is. okay? I really struggled with that. This is not creative writing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the interview. Okay, so before I even go into this, let me say, of course, last year, all of the interviews were virtual. And what that means is every school kind of did their own thing. Some schools did a whole day virtual session where you have interviews and some program introductions and some time with students. Some schools broke it up into 2 half days in order to kind of prevent Zoom fatigue. Um, this year, I don't think there's going to be a uniform way that all the schools do their interviews. Um, I'm hearing a lot of programs talk about doing a virtual interview, a kind of abbreviated virtual interview phase, and then an in-person recruiting phase. Back in the day, 2 years ago, what it used to look like is that was all together. You come in person, you interview in person, you see the city in person, you see the school in person, everything was done at the same time. I think a lot of schools are going to break that up so that there's the interview phase and then the recruiting phase separately. Maybe some schools might go back to the old way it's done. A huge point that I want to make, though, regardless of how they do this, is that the interview matters. I don't know of a single school that interviews just for looks. You have to perform well in the interview to get an offer. And by perform well, what I mean is they're looking for scientific conversation. Sorry about that. They're looking for a dialogue. They're looking for you to be able to talk about your research. So know your research. They might grill you or they might ask you questions. They're not trying to grill you to see what you know. They're just trying to see, can you talk about your work? So a good way to practice is to talk about your research with others. But similarly, they're going to talk about their work, and you should similarly ask them questions, pepper them with questions you have, whether it's connecting something they said to something you learned in class, or if it's clarifying something that they said, or if it's asking about, if they show you some data and if it's asking about, oh, well, how is that experiment done? That's okay. Be engaged and be thoughtful and pay attention to what they're saying. That requires getting over a lot of nerves. I get that. It's very nerve wracking sitting there knowing you're being interviewed. But as much as you can switch your mind from saying, I'm in an interview, to instead think, I get to talk to scientists about science. I'm having a dialogue. That is the way better mentality to have. And for me, kind of even just making that mental switch and like pretending kind of helps me calm down so I can be myself more authentically. So investigate the research of the professors and write down questions. If you want to write down questions in advance, you can. Some people do that and it's very effective. If you're comfortable talking science and you feel comfortable doing that already, you might not need to do that. So I've seen some people who just kind of need that as a little bit of a self-confidence before going in. They might have those questions a little bit in advance. That's great. I think for me, I just really was a curious person. So I knew I'm very shy, but for some reason when I'm talking science, I'm very engaged. And so I didn't do a lot of like reading of their papers in advance. I just looked at their website so that I could get a general idea of what they did. There's not a right way to do it. I think what you really need to do is to think about what would make you most comfortable in having a scientific dialogue. I see a question here. Prior to the pandemic, how did Vanderbilt interview international students? Great question. We did a combination. For international students who were here in the US, of course, we would bring them in like anybody else. For international students who are not in the US, we would do kind of what we did last year, which is well, it wasn't Zoom, it was Skype interviews or phone call interviews. So it just depends. We do accommodate your schedule. If you're an international person who's not in the US, we work around what works best for you. Okay, in the interview, be prepared to explain anomalies in your academic records. You're not being interviewed for your academics. So the work you're being interviewed more to talk about your research. But there might be an occasional faculty member who might ask you a question, and it's okay to be able to explain that. Be well rested, that's important. Be as comfortable as you can. Um, by comfortable, wear comfortable shoes if you're in person. This is a huge deal. It does not matter how you look. You want to be professional, but it really doesn't matter how you look. We had a guy come in for an interview once who was just wearing very normal clothes, a t-shirt, baseball cap on his head. He blew us away. We gave him an interview. We kind of talked about, oh, he was wearing a baseball cap. That's kind of interesting. But nobody had a doubt of whether or not we were going to accept him. So don't wear, shoes that will hurt your feet just to look nice. That's not going to change whether you're accepted. Be flexible. What I mean by that is there might be faculty members who have to cancel last minute, and you might have to shift to another faculty member to interview you. That's okay. They don't expect you to know their research then, of course, because you might find out a minute before your interview. Don't be surprised by that. Don't let it catch you off guard. It's okay um, to have things kind of shift around a little bit. Just ask them more questions and let them know, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I was meeting with you until right this minute. So I might ask you some more questions. That's okay. And of course, be professional. So in person, if you're in person, there might be an opportunity to go out in the evenings. Might even be able to go to a bar or two with students. That's wonderful. If you have that chance, you should try to take advantage of it. Saying someone who's a very shy person who is exhausted at the end of the day, who didn't ever do that because I was too exhausted, I'm going to tell you now, you should try to do that because it's really informative. So do it, break out of your shell, do it. But don't get drunk. It's okay to have a couple of drinks, but don't go too far. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to run over my time, but I think that's okay. So if you can stick around for the rest of the talk, great. If not, of course, the recording is going to be posted online. So if you need to catch the rest of it at the end, works for me. Final decision considerations. It's okay to really care about how a place feels. You'll probably hear this a lot. There's a lot of your gut that goes into your decision. There are a lot of students who want to make kind of a rubric and count up points. We're all scientists, right? It's okay if you don't have a rubric and if you just want to go based on what feels like the right fit for you. Go where you feel the most comfortable. This is a huge one. You also want to be challenged, but not pushed over the edge. There are some places that are known for being highly competitive places. If that fits your style, fantastic. If you're not going to thrive in an environment that's super cutthroat, don't feel like you have to go to a cutthroat place in order to be challenged if that's going to really, cut into your mental health. Okay. Think about what the resources are like. So, for example, core facilities, these are institutional research facilities that provide expertise in things like sequencing or imaging or structural biology sorts of techniques. Think about those because that can impact the caliber of science that you do. Go to a place that has that. Resources also include things like career development and mental health resources and counseling resources and community building resources. Make sure you are thoughtful about how you're going to feel as a student, but how you're going to be prepared for the next step as well. And then also where you can have the most options, research and personal is okay. But don't go to a place just because they give you the biggest stipend. I know that a grad school stipend is not that big. Here at Vanderbilt, it's 32,500 and will probably go up by the time y'all would enter. If there's a place that's offering you more money, but you feel like you'll get better training, at the place with the lower stipend, I'm going to encourage you to think in the long run. Think in the long term about where you're going to become the best scientist yourself. To be honest, most schools base their stipend, of course, based on cost of living in their city, but also on their competitors. So you'll find that most schools are pretty comparable in terms of what the stipends are. Okay, and I just wanted to put this up to give you some feedback that we have gotten from people who have interviewed at Vanderbilt and what they chose to make their decision based on. And there are really three buckets that the responses we get fall into. And I think each of these reasons are completely legitimate reasons. So the specific research that's being done. So someone picked a school because the research was better aligned with their personal preferences, or the research faculty at a particular program are more aligned with what they want to do. Totally legitimate. Some people picked based on location. So closeness to friends and family. That's okay. Maybe distance from family might be an attractive thing for you. That's okay too. Whether or not I wanted to live in a city, that's a huge deal. Or here, this person picked a city because or a school because it was located in their hometown with their family. All completely okay. And it's okay if location isn't important to you. The point is, there's not a right way to do this. Atmosphere here. So someone said seeing students of color in leadership and faculty interact with students in a casual setting demonstrated camaraderie. So all of those things can be important to you, and it's okay to make your decision based on any or all of these things. Resources, I mentioned this before, I'll just mention it again. I've got a blog specifically for people applying to graduate schools. If you haven't checked it out, just Google Materials and Methods blog Vanderbilt and you'll find it. You get it, Materials and Methods, like a paper. Yeah, okay. So that's where that's from. Check it out. I've mentioned it before, the NIH has some great resources too. If you haven't checked it out, they also have a great postbac program. And then if you want to think a little bit more about the interview or like personal statement, what to write in there, I've done some episodes for the Hello PhD podcast. So if you just Google Hello PhD Beth Bowman, you'll find I think it's 3 episodes for them. So you could check them out. Also, I really love them. They're wonderful people. Josh Hall and Daniel Arneman, the hosts, are just really lovely people. Some last minute facts I'm going to go over. Just some questions I get very commonly, whether I've addressed them or not, just to go over. Should I contact the faculty of where I'm applying? That's a great question. It really depends on the type of program you're looking at. If you're looking at an umbrella program that's over a lot of different faculty, almost certainly they're going to have a centralized admissions committee that's just looking at the applications and not trying to match the students with faculty. And so contacting faculty in advance is not going to impact, the likelihood of you getting in. If you're looking at a very small departmental based program, then maybe contacting faculty might matter because they might be a little more thoughtful about fit and about making that match. So I think it really depends on the type of program you're applying to. If you're looking mostly at broad umbrella style programs or maybe interdepartmental based programs, I don't really think you need to contact faculty. Now, if you want to contact them because you have questions, of course you can do that. I'm not telling you not to, but don't do it thinking it's going to get your foot in the door because it probably won't make a big difference. Should I submit earlier on the deadline? I've kind of alluded to this. Try to submit before the deadline. So most schools do some sort of rolling admissions. But with that said, most people don't look at applications until around, at the earliest, early to mid-November. So don't feel like you need to get it in August. Um, well, this should say, should you discuss the summer 2020 and summer 2021 plans on your application? So of course, COVID has impacted so many people throughout, this entire year and a half. It is okay to talk about how that has impacted your experiences. If it made you miss a summer or a couple of summers of research, if you didn't have the opportunity to do research at home, because your school wasn't allowing people to do that, talk about it. But a better way than just saying, I couldn't do research, a better thing to do would be then to talk about what you did instead. Hopefully, you've taken the time to learn something new. Or if you're here, you're in a virtual seminar series that's preparing you for this path. So use it as a chance to say that you extended yourself to take advantage of opportunities that were available to you rather than just sitting around. So I think just saying, I couldn't do this, that's understandable, but it's not going to be as attractive as saying, I couldn't do X, Y, or Z, so I did A, B, and C. That's a way better way to talk about it. Okay, for the interview, how much prep work should you do before the faculty interviews? I kind of mentioned this. It just depends on you and your comfort level. At the very least, look at the websites to make sure you know a little bit about the work that they're doing. Should you go out with current students? I already said it. Yes, it's definitely okay. Don't go too far. Yeah, this is a good question. Should I bring printed slides or notes? I've had people do this and I've had people ask if they can do this. So for example, when you're talking about your research, do you want to bring some slides with you when you're talking through your research? I have really mixed feelings about this. I've seen it go either way. I've seen faculty say, that's really well prepared and they could talk through the data and it was very effective. I've also seen faculty say that the student used it as a crutch and could not then talk about their research unless it was on the page. So you don't want to bring slides or no, very few people do this, by the way, like 5 or 10% of people I've seen do this. You don't want to do this if you can't talk about your research without them. Only do this if it's providing like data or a schematic that you can walk through and also answer questions about. Okay. So if you only need it because you're not going to know your research enough without it, then you need more practice interviewing. You need to get in front of other people and talk through your science better because you're not going to interview well. Okay, that was kind of blunt. Once again, I don't have much time to talk about Vandy. So you know what? I'm just going to leave it because I did talk about it briefly last time. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And that's not the goal here. My goal is not to sell you on Vanderbilt. Hopefully you can see we're a great place anyway. But my goal is to help you in applying to graduate schools. I will let you go. I'm sorry I ran over. I talked too much, but it's wonderful to see you guys. And if you have any questions at all through anything, I hope you can tell I'm totally available. I love to help with anything. So don't hesitate to reach out to me, whether you're here in person or not. Okay, y'all have a wonderful day. Good luck. Bye.
Check out our website to find recordings of all of our videos. We'll get them posted about a week after each of the presentations. We can't wait to see you!